Hello. If you're here for effective storytelling in personalization, you're in the right place. My name is Scott Abel, and I'm filling in for the regular host of the show, Kevin Nichols, today. Welcome. Let me tell you a few things about our webinar platform. We don't have access to your camera or your microphone during today's broadcast, which means we can't see or hear you during the show. We are recording this webinar, as we do with all the programs that we produce here on the Content Wrangler. You can watch the recording on demand about 30 minutes after today's live show ends. And the process is pretty simple. Just grab the URL that you're using to watch today's live broadcast, and that will magically turn into an on-demand recording that you can watch later or even share with somebody else that you think might benefit from the content that was provided today. Of course, it's a talk show. We want you to talk to us, and we provide a functionality to let you do that. It's called the Ask a Question feature. It's located beneath your webinar viewing panel. You can ask a question at any time by clicking in there and typing in a question and sending it in to me. I'll queue up as many of those as possible and try to get answers from our guests today on the show. Also, there's some additional content in the attachment section located beneath your webinar viewing panel. You'll find a link to Alan Porter's webinar, to his LinkedIn profile, and also to the information from our sponsors today, Avenue CX and Heredo. You'll also find a link to an upcoming conference, which I'll tell you about here in just a minute. We're not going to have any polls today, so we won't have to worry about that. But I would like to ask you to rate the quality of the information that you heard today on the show just before you leave, whenever that is. Super easy. Click the Vote tab directly beneath your webinar viewing panel. The voting scale is 1 to 5. 1 is a low rating, 5 is an exceptional one. There's a little field into which you can type some feedback, and we share that feedback with the presenters. So don't be shy. Please do that before you get out. It just takes about 2 or 3 seconds to give us a vote. Avenue CX is a sponsor. You can learn more about their content strategy services at avenuecx.com. And of course, you can follow them on the web and social media, where they are very active in sharing all kinds of content. I recommend that you do. And I'm really excited about our upcoming conference in Atlanta, Georgia. This is our annual LavaCon conference, the conference for content strategy and technical communication management. This year, it takes place October the 5th through the 8th, and I hope you'll join me there with about 400 of your peers. We'll be listening to case studies and lessons learned, best practices, presentations from industry practitioners and other experts from tangential fields. You'll also be able to attend a variety of networking sessions. This conference is particularly fun. And it also has a great exhibition area where you can learn about software and services directly from the vendors that represent themselves at the booth. In the exhibition hall. There's also an area for consultants where you can come and talk about the problems that you have and listen to how they may be able to help you solve them. So I'd encourage you to join us. And remember, you can save 10% off the cost of registration at the conference when you use discount code TCW at checkout. And one final word, I'd like to thank the sponsor of the Content Wrangler webinar channel, Heredo, the AI-enabled component content management system platform that's in use around the globe to deploy documentation and developer portals that delight customers. Let's hear from one of their customers right now.
When we were, looking for a CCMS, we were trying to find the right one, and we were coming from an unstructured wiki environment. At the time, it seemed like that was everything that we needed. But after we saw what Heredo could do, we were very excited. After moving into Heredo, I could very quickly see the benefits. Content was actually organized in an understandable way. I was able to find what I needed when I needed it. With structured authoring, it's almost like a template. So it's really easy to see what information is needed in what area. So anybody could jump in and enter the content that they need in the right place, and the writer can come in later and polish it up, get it ready for publishing. It was a big transition, but in the end, it was totally worth it.
All right. Well, this is my name is Scott Abel, and this is our guest today, Alan Porter. Alan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and it's great to see you and talk to you again, Scott.
Yeah, nice to see you too. Where are you broadcasting from today?
Just north of Baltimore, Maryland.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and thank you, audience members, for being here. Obviously, I am not Kevin Nichols, the Personalization Wrangler. I'm Scott Abel. I'll be filling in today for him. We're going to take a few questions and talk about a few things today, but Let me revisit the promise of today's show just to kind of give us an idea of what we said we were going to talk about. We said we were going to discover what makes a story not just good, but impactful, and how it can be tailored to resonate on a personal level with your audience. I think that's something that we all want to do. So why don't we start today, Alan, with the first question that I think seems to be the obvious ones. What is brand storytelling and why do we need that?
Actually, I'm going to answer that by saying what it's not.
Okay, great.
Brand storytelling is not talking about how awesome you are as a brand. Way too many companies do that. They talk about themselves, they talk about their products, and the last thing they talk about, if they talk about them at all, is maybe their customers. I'm going to borrow a quote from Robert Rose, excellent content marketer, who always said that marketing is telling people you're a rock star. Content marketing and storytelling is proving that you are. And to my mind, what that means is that you really need to understand what your customer's trying to do and put them first. And for me, that's what brand storytelling is about actually showing how you can help your customer achieve what it is that they're trying to do by giving them good examples that maybe other customers have achieved. So it's not about going, we've got the greatest product since XYZ, or new and improved product, or we've built this product out of, it's got these all brand new functions. It's really about how you can help, and doing it in a way that shows that you empathize with your customer and understand your customer and the issues that they're trying to solve with your product or with your service.
Do you have an example of in your history where someone you've worked with or you yourself have used a brand story in order to do what you just suggested?
That's a good question. Yeah, very much so. Thinking about the idea of one of the software companies I worked for. Originally, it was very much in terms of the marketing and the messaging was very much in terms of, we're rolling out this new feature and function. When we were actually launching a AI product several years ago, we switched that messaging away from, hey, look at what our AI can do, to how could it help some of our particular customers. So one of our areas, we had a lot of customers, was in the insurance industry. One of the biggest issues the insurance industry has is fraud, particularly automotive insurance fraud, where basically, we've all seen the videos, somebody buys an old car and then they drive it in front of a truck, and the truck runs into the back of it, and then they sue the truck owner. But, with the AI system that we were putting in, one of the things that we very quickly realized we could do is actually just identify if the same vehicle was showing up in multiple claims, or the claims are all happening on the same street corner. So it allowed the benefit, and the technology allowed the company to identify that. But the benefit to them was it reduced the number of fraudulent. It increased their ability to recognize fraudulent claims. So that was how we messaged it. Not, hey, look at what our LLM can do and our AI can do in terms of photo matching and pattern recognition, but was like, we can actually help you identify fraudulent claims almost instantaneously when they come in. That somebody sends in a photograph, we could almost instantaneously go, hey, that vehicle's been in like 12 claims in the last 3 years, and flag it as a potentially fraudulent claim. So understanding what their big issues were and positioning it that we had the technology to help them solve that was a much better message, and actually got much better engagement, rather than look at this wonderful features and functions and algorithms. I mean, they didn't want to talk about algorithms. Sure. They wanted to talk about reducing claims.
And that seems to be one of the challenges, right? Technical documentation was usually about us telling people how to use our product. We were not trying to convince them to understand why they would want to use it. That was a totally different intent. So let me give you an example. I think I had somebody on the show a few years ago who came from Salesforce, and it was a blog post that a technical writer had written. It was a story. Salesforce, I believe, wanted people to upgrade their security to multi-factor authentication. And then they had the marketing team do a big push on their new functionality that allows you to do that. And then they were not getting the conversions that they wanted. And a technical writer took it upon themselves to write an article about why you would need and benefit from multiple factor authentication, and that the pain points are miniature compared to what you would experience if you didn't have that. And the blog post was a story, but it converted more people than the other initiative, right? It started picking up the missing information left off. And I think that was the power of that mechanism.
And you make a good point with that one. Sometimes the storytelling is not around the benefit of using the product or service. Sometimes the most effective storytelling is about, here's what happens if you don't do this.
That's a really good point. And I think that this may be just not even limited to storytelling. I participated in a usability study recently where I got to watch for a few minutes as an observer a group of developers use some API documentation, which is primarily reference materials that they need in order to build whatever they are building. And we put an LLM on top of it to see if that would help them with their discovery to find the right answers. And what we learned was the developer would ask something like, what's the parameter for blah, blah, blah? And it's in a table. The LLM would go to the table, get the information, and bring it back. Then the developer would do something unexpected. He or she would ask, what if I don't use that parameter? That's not in the documentation. It's not auto-generated. There's no magical docs as code solution that's spitting out the answers to that. So they had to create that missing content in the form of blog posts and articles and stories in order to feed the LLM so that it would be better capable of answering the question the way the brand wanted to. But it didn't have, I guess the point was there were missing stories and context. They had all the data that the developer needed. They didn't have any stories or any supporting materials because the developers tell them aloud, I don't want or need any of that. But I think what we should hear is they don't require that to make the API connect. Like the job is to connect it, so they need a couple pieces of information to connect it. But in their mind, they don't need that. But a new developer was also in the usability test and didn't know any of that. So they had totally different questions than the experienced developers did. And those stories helped fill in the blanks.
Yeah, and you actually just used for me what is the magic word there, which is context. It's actually really understanding the context of what the messaging is around and what your customers are trying to do. If you just go off data, I have this little phrase I use a lot, which basically is data without context is just numbers. It doesn't really mean anything until you actually start to understand where people are trying to use the data, or where they're trying to use the technical documentation, or where they're trying to use the product. And again, coming back to what is the problem that they're trying to solve, what's the conflict that they have that they're trying to actually use your product or service, or read your documentation or your messaging, or work with your chatbot to actually try and solve. Just to give an example, just to give a negative example of context, live in the States, from the UK originally. I still have a UK bank account. We're about to head to the UK for an extended business/personal trip. My UK, I don't have a ATM card for my UK bank account. We're going to the UK. I have money in my UK bank account. I want to use an ATM card so I don't have to, so I can use the money I have in England. There is literally no way with my bank systems for me to do that through chatbots, phone trees, anything like that, because they don't understand the context. Everything is geared around the fact that their customer is in England.
Yeah.
I guess a system that understands the context that I actually don't live in England, and I want a bank card, because there's just that missing context. And again, it's that negative thing. What if somebody doesn't fit within the parameters that we've set for?
Okay, I get that. I think I have a UK story that's similar. I was in Ireland and needed access to my credit card for whatever reason, and couldn't find it or whatever it was.
Right.
And then I needed to figure out how to call them, right? So the very first thing I tried to do was locate their number. Well, they have a number, but it's an 800 number, which only works in the United States.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
When I finally tried to call them, they were basically trying to onboard me. Everything was about trying to convert me into a customer. I was already a customer. I was trapped in another country, and it was, crisis and late at night. So when they got to a person, finally, they were able to be empathetic. I wonder if that's the role also of the context, is to help us present a more tailored experience that shows that we understand that they're having a moment, that yes, you might need to order a new credit card, but you're in another country in a different time zone and blah, blah, blah. It needs to be a different story for me, right? And it's not always aligned with my situation.
And the difficulty is there, I was having this conversation with a client the other day, you don't know what you don't know. But the thing is, you can start to, and this is probably part of the discussion later, but as you talk to your customers, you start to find out what they don't know, and start to build these use cases and capture these use cases that allow you to then start to build messaging that, to your point, shows empathy and understanding that, it might be an outlier, but that outlier could be the difference between getting a big order and not getting an order, because you really helped somebody by understanding their issue or their problem. For me, context, empathy, they all play into really effective storytelling.
Excellent. Kevin had given me some questions to ask you, and one of them was he wanted to know what you thought was important for personalized content or personalization in general. What's important factors to consider?
For me, my first question, I always ask when somebody mentions personalization when I'm working with a client, is what do they mean by personalization? What are they aiming for? Are they aiming to personalize down to an industry sector or a group, or are they literally looking to go down to messaging the individual? Messaging the individual is really hard. Yes, a lot of companies capture a lot of information about individuals, but when you start to repeat that back, you very quickly hit what I call the creep factor. That if you've captured 50, I think I was working with a pharma company, and believe you me, the amount of information that they capture, I mean, they can personalize down to a scary level. But the research they'd done basically showed that if they repeated back more than like 5 data points about somebody, then that person would disengage. It's like, that's getting creepy. You know too much about me. I don't want to know that you know that much about me. So understanding what that level of engagement is important. I think the best personalization, again, from a storytelling point of view, comes back to that word we just used, empathy. Understanding the customer, understanding what they are, and maybe giving what a brewing company that I was involved with very briefly, they had the idea that they would give the impression of personalization. So they found they would basically tailor their messages to groups of common interest. And that group could be 100,000 people who all shared the common interest. But the way they messaged it, when you read it as an individual, you were like, oh, I get that. That's what I'm thinking, or that's what, that's the problem I'm trying to solve, or that's the type, in that particular case, this is the sort of common interest in a region. So, oh yeah, I want a regional brew that, has these particular ingredients and so forth. And that could be a big group of people, but you reading it as an individual think, oh, they understand me. That's what I'm looking for. So really, again, it depends what you mean by personalization, what level that you want to do it at, what level of granularity. And the higher the level of granularity, the easier it is, because it said you can generate the feeling of personalization by understanding if there's a common interest or a common problem within the customer base, you can address that. Coming down to actually the individual, particularly with automated systems, and you're trying to put individual pieces of data about an actual person in the messaging, that can actually very quickly set up walls and actually have exactly the opposite effect to the one you want. So you have to be very careful about that.
What does effective personalization look like in your mind?
When you get that trigger point of I recognize myself in what the messaging is describing, or I recognize that I understand that they understand me and my issue or my region or my problem. It's that point of empathy, that point of recognition for me is, okay, that's effective personalization and effective storytelling. So it resonates with me on an emotional level.
Excellent. Let me jump to an audience question that I think is pretty good right now. What's the difference between storytelling and story selling? Have you heard these terms before?
That's interesting. No, I'll be completely honest. I've not heard of story selling, but I'm making a jump assumption here that basically it's using storytelling to sell and market.
The deal, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, close the deal. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, any interaction we have with a customer is selling, is marketing. I mean, we're all in marketing. We may not be in the marketing department. We may be in technical documentation. We might be in the legal department. We might be in customer support. We might be on a support desk, but we're all selling. That's what every company's in business for, is to generate revenue. We're all in marketing. We're all in selling. For me, every interaction you have with a brand is part of the brand experience. It's part of selling. So I've not heard it split that way. I'd rather think of them as being synonymous, that whether you're trying to solve a problem or you're trying to get somebody to buy your product, you still need to be telling good stories good stories can be really effective in that. They always say one of the best ways of marketing is peer recommendation. And that comes from your friends or your colleagues telling stories about how they liked a product and use a product. It can have the exact opposite. I actually want to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story about what really got me into thinking about storytelling. Was several years ago, the company I worked for. At that point, I lived in Austin, Texas, and a lot of us worked remote. But there was probably about 15 to 20 of us within the company worked in Austin. And we would get together once a month just to meet, have dinner, talk about things going on in the company, exchange stories, and so forth. We were going to go to an all hands thing that was actually happening in town the following day. And somebody said, I can't make it to the all hands thing tomorrow. I've got to go talk to the toll company about my toll tag and my bill for using the toll roads. And there was probably at that point, I don't know, 8 to 10 people around the table. Everybody around the table started telling stories about their bad experiences with the toll company. And that got me thinking, if everybody's going to tell bad stories about a brand or a product, how can we turn that around and get everybody to tell good stories about our brand and our products? And that's what really got me thinking about the power of storytelling. And to be honest, if you're talking about story selling, that was the downside of story selling, that basically everybody around that table, if somebody was thinking about getting a toll tag, would probably have said, I'm not going to bother, because of the bad experience. If we could turn that around so you can actually educate folks who work in marketing and sales and customer support and anybody who has impact with a client or a prospect or a customer, to tell good stories about how their product is being used by other clients, other customers, or how you've solved things, then I think that would be good story selling, to use that expression.
I like that. I think I'm going to Google that, story selling, too, to see if there might be a book.
I actually just wrote it down in my notebook.
It's pretty savvy, actually. All right, so let's ask a more detailed question. If you wanted to have a storytelling approach and test it out, how would a brand go about building the strategy for that, or planning it? Like, what do they need to consider in order to do that instead of just launching into randomly throwing stories out there?
Okay. The obvious answer would be maybe you should go talk to your clients and see what they're actually doing with your products. Clients have always got great stories about how they use your products. The problem tends to be that a lot of the folks who create content are actually siloed away from talking to the clients, which I've never understood, but it very much happens. So when I run my storytelling workshops, actually one of the first things I do about building a storytelling strategy is I ask that the folks in that workshop come from all the various functions that have customer-facing ops. So that could be tech doc, it could be, I like to get in the room the tech doc people, the marketing people, the UX people, the customer support people. One of the last ones I did, we had some folks in from cybersecurity, because they were writing new processes for cybersecurity for their clients and stuff. And it's great because what tends to happen then is they start to tell stories inside the organization about impacts that they've had with customers, and start understanding that there's commonality, that they're maybe all doing the same thing, or they got the same processes. They may be calling them slightly different names, but everybody has stories about the clients. So really, my first thing is just talk to each other internally about your customers, what the common problems are your customers are, and how you are solving those problems. And then start thinking about those from, how do I tell that story, not from a, hey, we did this great thing, but this customer had this problem, and this is how we helped, how we understood it and how we helped solve it. So move from that inside out perspective to that outside in perspective. And if you start asking around the organization, you'd be amazed at the number of really good stories that you can find that you can then use to actually start pushing stuff out. So just an example, one of the a software company I worked for a while, when we took over the blogging and moved the blogs from, here's our latest feature, do this, do that, do the other, to actually telling stories about the customers and the benefits that they were getting from the engagement went up. I think it was like 600% in the first 12 months. Because that was a simple thing to do. It wasn't a great big corporate strategy. It was literally the product marketing team at that point getting together, walking around the organization, literally walking around the organization, sitting down with people over coffee or lunch and saying, tell me the stories about the customers that you deal with and how they're using our product. And so it was like 3 of us just started writing these blog posts, and it had a massive impact. And it was a good way of testing it out. And from that, we grew a larger strategy, because we could prove the actual impact and engagement from telling customer-focused stories.
Well, help me understand that. Some of our viewers want some examples, I think, sometimes. Let's use technical communication, since we have a lot of technical writers in our audience. If you were a software company that was trying to reach technical communicators, how might you use stories to communicate to them more than you're doing already? I mean, because it seems like it's additional value. It's not just the regular content you would provide.
I know I keep harping back to it, but
yeah,
my first thing is stop the features and benefits sell and move, features and benefits message, and move to a benefits from these features messaging. So, if you're, I don't know, reaching out to, so just, you talked about technical writers. When I ran a sales team for a CMS vendor, I challenged everybody on the sales, marketing, and support team to go a month and not use the phrase XML.
Okay, that could be a challenge.
or DITA. Okay.
Okay.
You could go a month and talk to a customer and not say XML and DITA. And what it did was they actually started to think about what was the job that somebody was trying to do. I want to make my content more findable. I want to, I'm looking for consistency. I want to be able to write something once and use it many times. These are all the things that we talk about from a CMS.
Yeah.
But thinking about it in terms of, what the technical writer's actually trying to do, or what the technical writer's boss is trying to do. Message stuff, again, story selling, I'm going to use that phrase now. If you're selling into a technical writer group, maybe say they want to go to a CCMS group.
Yeah.
If you go to the boss and start talking about DITA and XML and stuff like that, he's not interested. If you can say, we can create this thing once and sell it, put it across our website, our help desk, our social media, blah blah blah, in the cost of, then you can tell stories and you can say, hey, look what this company did. Or, just the video intro we just had was a nice story of, I thought I was okay in a wiki environment, but it turns out I actually need to be able to do all these other things. So, understanding what your customers are trying to do, and understanding, if you're using story to sell, understanding the stories that will resonate with the people who have their hands on the budget is another matter as well. So, understand what their pain is, understand what their empathy is, use their language. Don't use your language. Did that answer the question, Scott? And Scott appears to have frozen. Hi, Mark.
Hey. Hi,
Yes,
everyone.
it's Scott appeared to freeze there. So.
Yeah, well, I will fill in as Scott goes through his own technical difficulties. Those who are wondering who I am, I'm Mark Urell. I am the producer for the show. I was in the background fielding questions, and then I saw Scott having some freezing issues, so I hopped on. So I'll just pick up where you guys were going. So, the branded effective storytelling. So what was the last question that well, actually, why don't we take some questions from the audience real quick, because I'm seeing some.
Sure.
So Chris Siradides, I don't know how to pronounce that name, sorry. Chris from Cisco, he was asking, saying, great point about capturing actual customer stories from several internal teams. How can a classic story arc be adapted and abbreviated for the purpose of customer success stories?
Oh, okay. Beautiful leading, Chris. Thank you. This is actually something I did intend to talk about at some point during the presentation. Classic storytelling arcs, a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and so forth. Yes, you want to think about that. I will say a lot of companies are very good at the beginning and the middle.
Sorry, we wouldn't be complete without a technology failure. All the power went out. I was like, go ahead. I'm sorry. Jump
no, I was going to say, generally companies are very good at the beginning and the middle of stories, not that good about the end, about what happens when. And one of the real light bulb moments for me over the last several years, and anybody who's heard me talk recently will have known this, heard me say this. I was lucky enough several years ago to do some work for Marvel Comics and write some Marvel Comics. And one of the biggest storytelling light bulb moments for me was an email with one of the senior editors there, a guy called Tom Brevet, who's been at Marvel for like 25, 30 years and is like the senior editor. And he has this thing that basically when you send in a script, it must fit this framework. And his framework is what he calls the 4 C's. That's that, any story should have a character, which sounds obvious, but that character should be facing a conflict. That character makes a choice, and there's consequences to that choice. And that got me thinking, how does that apply in a business environment? And with the storytelling art that Chris was just talking about. And I think it really does, because if you think about the character is your customer, or your client, or whatever, but the person you're trying to address, what's the conflict? And I mentioned this a couple of times. What is it that they're trying to do in their daily life that's provoked them actually wanting to consume your content or listen to your messaging? So, do they want to learn something? Are they trying to use a product? Are they interested in finding out more about your services because they're facing a particular issue? Like, the insurance company, their conflict is too many fraudulent claims. How do we solve that? So, you've got your client, you've got the conflict, then they make a choice. And that choice could be to implement something or not implement something. It could be to use the products in a certain way or not use the products in a certain way. It could be they want to listen to a certain group of people, or they might want to go out on a trip. But they make a choice of something, and then there's the consequences of what happens when they make that choice, which sort of comes back to the conversation Scott and I were having earlier around, well, what are the choices? They might not do something. What's the consequences of them not doing something? Or what's the consequences of them making a choice? So in terms of putting together a sort of storytelling with an arc that applies in a business or technical communications or marketing or whatever, is if you think in terms of those four things, who is my character? Who's my client, my customer? What is it they're trying to do? What's the conflict? What are the choices they can make or not make? What are the consequences of doing that? And then put together a story that basically answers those four things. And ideally, you want to add a fifth C, which is the context within which they make that choice and the context of the consequences. But as a minimum, I'm always like, I ever since I had that email with that in and that light bulb moment, I was like, perfect. That's always been my framework for any storytelling sort of messaging going forward, is those four C's: character, conflict, choice, consequence.
The four C's, yeah. I think you've talked about the four C's before.
Yeah.
What do you think about the absence of this? So what happens? What story would you tell a leader about what happens if they just don't understand their customers and deliver the stories that are relevant to them? What's the risks to the brand, I guess?
The biggest risk to the brand is you don't get any customer. You lose your customers' loyalty, you lose your customers' faith. Too many brands, like I say, just talk about themselves. So you end up with, so what? I mean, nobody is going to come to your website just to read your latest marketing message. They're going to come to your website, or you'll come to you, talk to your people because they want help. They want to solve something, or they're facing something. They have an issue that they need information about. If you don't, you're just gradually just going to lose customers. You're going to lose sales. You are making the sales up front, but what you're going to get is churn and turnover because people don't want to engage with you, or you're not providing the right answers. I'm sure we've all got experiences, a bit like the toll tag. We've all got experiences where we've bought into a product or service and we get very frustrated with it very quickly because we can't get the help that we need or the answers that we need. Or we start seeing messaging from that particular company around, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't align with the way I think about the world, or it doesn't align with my particular viewpoints, or it doesn't align with the way I want to use the product or the way I was sold the product. So, if you don't understand who your customers are, you're going to lose those customers very quickly.
You had mentioned earlier that it was important to have a clear definition of what personalization means to the organization that's attempting to deliver these individualized experiences. What do you think is the definition of personalization normally from a business point of view? What kind of definition would you conjure up?
That's a good question. And it's going to be a horrible answer because it depends. Like I said earlier, it really does depend on what you're trying to do. It's a term that gets thrown around. I've seen it on so many projects that I've been involved with that one of the this is going to increase personalization. And again, it comes down to what's that level of granularity? What are you looking for? At the end of the day, a definition of personalization to me means that when I consume your message, I recognize myself in the audience. It provokes an emotional reaction from me that is one of recognition. How I get to that, you've really got to define. Again, it's used as a very general term, usually from high up. Oh, we've got to have a personalization program. We're going to do personalization. Until you ask that question, what do you mean by personalization? And I will tell you, probably 90% of the time I ask that question, people do not have an answer. It's just a line in a strategy document. And they've not really thought through what that actually means. So for me, on the receiving end of personalization, that is, like I said, is when I get that moment of recognition that you understand me or you understand my problem and you're delivering a product. But I will say it's one of those things that when I push on it, I very rarely get a good answer because nobody's really defined what it means different things to different companies and different markets.
Right. I mean, when I talk about it, I try to understand that the word personalization is so squishy. It's one of those very subjective words.
Yeah.
If you equate personalization to individualization, it maybe is a way to say I'm trying to discern between you and another person, or I'm trying to individualize your experience for you, the individual. But I think what you're getting at is that it's more than just, hey, Tina, which is your name. So that's a recognition. Hey, they recognize my name, but they don't recognize what country I'm in, or that
Oh yeah, I mean,
don't own a home and they're trying to give me a home loan mortgage refinancing.
yeah, I mean, how often I literally had it the other day. I had an email. Why don't you sign up for this product? Blah 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 blah. A day after I'd bought the product.
Oh wow.
So it's like that. Yes, I got a nice personalized email with my name in it, and it recognized that I had a particular thing that I was trying to solve, and I bought that product to do that. But it didn't recognize the fact that I'd actually already bought the product. So that was not a good.
You know what? And I wonder if this is the culmination of the two kind of typical approaches. One has been the spray and pray approach, right? Like I'm in a rental property, so I do not own the property. I received a global, probably mailing that everybody in the neighborhood got about some bank that wants to refinance people's loans on their houses. So I received it. My neighbor, who on one side is like a college student with two roommates, they don't own the house. They can't even remotely buy a house. That's not happening. Then there's a retired couple. They're in their 80s, like late 80s. This was an advertisement for a 30-year refinance. I was like,
Yeah.
89 years old. When do you think that they're going to be alive to pay off this 30-year debt? And so clearly that was a spray and pray based on probably geography or something, but it wasn't about the individual people. It was about the people they believe live in the neighborhood, and maybe they'd be lucky and reach a few. Is that what we're trying to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, that comes down to data without context is just numbers. That's pulling things from a database of people who probably live in a zip code.
Yeah, and they didn't have the context at all. Like they didn't know that these young people could have no money, first of all, and don't own the property. Second, I'm just a lessor, right? Or lessee, or I'm not actually owning the property, so I can't. Well, I mean, I could try to sell it, but I don't think that would work.
So they probably got a list of names for a zip code or a certain blocks or whatever, and
you think that
there's no context in there that says who are these individuals? Or
would it have been better to have a story about the mortgage and then allow people to select whether or not they are part of that audience? If you're going to do a global spray and pray, do you just do a story instead? Because they just made an assumption that everybody that received it should somehow want to sell their house. And it's like, I don't even own the house. How can I sell this house?
Yeah, I mean, what might have been better is a story about how we help homeowners generate, along their journey on the house. No matter where you are on the property ladder, we can help you.
Oh, you're right, because that would have allowed for the people who are not like me, not in a position to sell the house because I don't own it, to understand that brand does want to help me, and if I'm ever in the market for a house, I can.
Right. And your students might have been, well, we can't afford it now, but when we're thinking about it, this might be a company we want to think about. To help us get on the property ladder.
Let me flip this around for some of the tech writers in the audience. So most of the time, tech writers are stuck in their world trying to do the things that they do the best, communicate and translate those complicated things into language that people can understand. But how do you switch your mindset from being a tech writer that writes step-by-step instructions to storytelling? Do you have any suggestions on how they could do that?
I'll just go by my experience, because that's what I started out as a tech writer. Spent half my career in tech. I'm still around the industry. It's again partly that what I said earlier on is that mindset of thinking about how somebody outside is going to use, say, your technical documentation and story, and start thinking in terms of the stories. I still think the 4 C's even applies to technical documentation. And I think, the basic story structure of beginning, middle, and end. I did a presentation on this at Convex recently. If you think about beginning, middle, and end, those 3 parts, that's the same basically as a data structure of, concept, task, and reference. I think that actually maps to the basic idea of storytelling. I think where technical documentation has fallen down is what I said earlier, is the end part. We're really good at setting up the beginning, and then, you know, this is the sort of overview of what we're going to do. Here's the task list, is the sort of middle. What we're generally not very good at is, here's the results of you doing that, which is the end, and how it helps you. If you start thinking about your technical documentation in terms of story arc, that helps. If you think about it in terms of those 4 C's, even before you not necessarily have to write your character into your technical documentation, but you think about, okay, who am I writing this for? What is it they're trying to solve? Okay, and then here's the list of choices. You can do these things, and maybe here's the consequences of doing or not doing those things, and here's the result. So you can start thinking in those sort of terms. You know, and I will say, I find, coming from a technical documentation background, when I am writing stories, having that linear framework mindset of step helps me make sure that I hit those things like the 4 C's, or I plan things out very, you know, when I write fiction, I'm still very much an outliner of here's the sort of story points I want to get in, here's the story beats I want to get in. Same for messaging, corporate messaging. I find coming from that background has been a really great help in actually working within content marketing, sales, support. Now as a storytelling consultant, it really helps with that mindset of building story arc.
Yeah. That cross-pollination and training across different divisions of the company gives you amazing insights you wouldn't have gotten anywhere else, which begs the question, if you're a technical communicator, in my experience, they're not always attuned to the whole customer journey. And maybe it's because they're very laser focused on one position in there. And we've traditionally thought of what we create as post-sale materials, like you only get it after the sale. Now we know people search for it way before they buy it.
Yes.
They rely on it. So that made us valuable, right? So we started doing all those things. But I guess I wonder if the question is, how can we use the story arc to set up like conflict, you know, resolution or whatever, but tie it to the customer journey? If you're a technical writer, you're not always aware of the customer journey. What do they need to know in order to map these stories to the customer journey?
I mean, ideally, they should be aware of the customer journey. You know, when they're talking to the SMEs, when they're talking, you know, the project starts, these are the questions we should be asking, even as technical writers. And you know, as any writer, as any content creator, who's it for? What's the problem we're trying to solve? How are we going to get there? Interesting thing about the customer journey is, again, sometimes the best way to find out about the customer journey is not to wait for the formal processes, is to find out it through informal means. If you are a technical writer and you're struggling with that, maybe just go out and have lunch with the folks in the customer support or content marketing or whoever's been, find out if somebody in the company's been doing customer journey mapping, and go and have a beer with them. It may not be a formal process, but I find it very effective. Just to give you an example, when I was at a large equipment manufacturer myself, and my team in content marketing, we made it known that we went to a certain franchise chicken wing place at lunch for every Thursday. And we basically made it known that we would be there, and we put out an invitation, and gradually people would come and join us on the Thursday for wings and beer and a chat. We learned so much on those Thursday lunch times because people would come and share their storytelling, share their stories. I'm afraid there's no magic formula. There's no documented process that I found for filling in those gaps beyond building a personal network and talking to people and getting them to share their stories to help you fill in the gaps. So if you don't know where your technical documentation fits in the customer journey, I'd say just go and find out. Go talk to people. I know generally tech writers, content creators, we tend to be introverts. We don't really like talking to people. But sometimes if you can just do that, you will find it way more valuable than sitting there and getting frustrated. You don't know stuff.
I've also found that when you do that, you end up schooling them too. Like they learn things about you. Like, I didn't even know your team was doing that.
Yeah. That cross-pollination of stuff. Like I said, when I get on my workshops, when I get people in the room, for me, the best part of those workshops is the 20 minutes, half an hour that tends to happen partway through the first morning, where I stand back and they're all talking to each other and doing I didn't know you did that. I didn't know you had that information stuff. And that cross-pollination that doesn't happen within those functional frameworks, but actually does within that informal networking environment. Whether you do that on a workshop, whether you do that in a classroom, whether you do that over a beer or chicken wings or whatever, but go out or you just walk the floor. That's one thing I was always a big proponent of, is when I was in an office building, was literally just before I started the day was walk the floor, talk to people. It really helps fill in those gaps and give you great content for storytelling.
That's great advice. We have a lot of technical writers in our audience, so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you went from your career as a technical writer to where you are now. What was that journey like, and is it possible for somebody to mimic that in your view?
I wouldn't say you want to mimic mine exactly, but so I'm going to go way back. I always wanted to be a writer from the age of 8. That's what I wanted to do. I was told when I got to college, I can't spell. I have mild dyslexia. I can't spell. There was no such thing as spell checkers back then, so my spelling was terrible. So I was told at school, go be an engineer. And after I left school, I was in the Merchant Marine, and there's not a lot to do when you're on board a ship with an automated engine room unless something breaks. So, you're on shift. What do you end up doing? I end up reading the tech manuals, and I'm like, somebody must be writing these. So when I came ashore, I ended up in tech doc, because that's great, my writing and engineering background. And I spent probably 15, 20 years in first 15 years of my career in technical documentation as a technical writer, running a tech pubs organization. Started working with a lot of the software companies that were actually providing the tools that we were using. Started listening to their stories, finding out where they had issues. One of the areas that was one of the companies I worked for, they realized they didn't have anybody on staff who understood their audience. So they hired me on basically to be that bridge between their engineering team and their audience. And that really, again, was around storytelling and using my expertise and my experience as to how they could build better products and message better products. And that sort of led me into the software side of the industry and working for various CMS and CCMS vendors on and off, and also into working in sort of content marketing again, because I could be that bridge, and which brought me to storytelling as well as you can tell, storytelling and reading and doing podcasts and all that other stuff. So I think for me, if you look, I think you just hit the nail on the head actually earlier, Scott. You can get the experience you get in technical documentation is unlike anywhere else in the organization. Everything an organization does or says or builds or sells at some point comes through the technical documentation team. It is the one place where all the intellectual property in a company comes together. And you're in no better position to actually take that experience, knowledge out into the rest of the organization, or out, like I did, into the companies that actually provide you the tools to do the job. So if you want to do it, just the worst thing I hate, and I said this at the last STC thing when we did a careers panel, I hate it when I hear somebody say, I'm just a technical writer. You're not just a technical writer. You are actually one of the teams that brings together everything that company does or says or sells. And you're perfectly positioned to take that and go somewhere else, and never refer to yourself as just anything.
I agree with that, because I think it just minimizes it, and it doesn't honor what we actually do, which is way more than the technique that we use. Is that we use a keyboard sometimes to create content, but what we're really doing is producing value. I think that's hard to mimic. But journey maps often reflect what teams think the journey is, not what customers actually experience. I've found that asking people in the company can be revealing, but it may not. I just would like to say from my personal experience, it may not reveal the real customer journey. It may reveal an imaginary customer journey. Could you talk about that? And if you agree that that might be a thing?
Oh yeah, that is. I mean, this is a whole other podcast, but which I have a real problem with customer journeys and personas that are made up internally by the team because they're just they're fiction. They're a reflection of what we think is happening, not what happened. The thing is, if you start with those internal conversations and find out what people think internally, then you can start to push to find out, to actually get on site or talk to actual customers and find out what their real journey is. Just to give an example, one company I work with, we did that. We sat out and we spent 3 days in the conference room. We put our customer journey together, and we reckoned there was these 8 touch points in the customer journey where we provided value. We then hired an external consultant company to go out and talk to people in that industry who did the particular job we were trying to do the customer journey map for. They found out that was actually a potential 16 points in that job where we could potentially provide value, and we were only providing value at 8 because we didn't know about the other 8 because we weren't talking to the actual customers. So at the end of the day, you do that. I did it with one of the insurance company I worked with in the past. We mapped their customer journey, and then I literally got on the phone and made phone calls with customers. And I found out that the customer journey that they mapped didn't reflect reality at all. They had all these various data points. What tended to happen is that when somebody they were like, oh, well, they'll go to the website at this point and they'll look at this piece of documentation at this point and blah, blah, blah. What tended to happen was that their clients, when they had a problem, would call their sales rep, and their sales rep would then walk down the corridor of the insurance office and find the information and walk back to his office and make a phone call and give the information back. They weren't going to the customers weren't going to the website. Customers weren't looking at the documentation. They were just picking up the phone or sending an email to their friend who sold them the policy.
And that's part of the journey, right? We often overlook that is part of the journey, and it may be something that's not so easy to see.
Yeah. So again, it's building those networks, getting out there, talking to people, getting on the phone, things like that. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think that's going to have to be the last word today on the show. We're out of time. Yeah, that hour went by quickly. I will have to say thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And thank you, audience members, for your good questions. I know that Alan appreciates that. If you give us
very much.
Just a moment to give us a rating on what you thought the quality of the information that you received today was, using our 1 through 5 star rating system, in which 1 is a low rating and 5 is an exceptional one. That would be super. We'd really appreciate it. Don't forget to learn more about our sponsor, Hereto, at hereto.com, and also Avenue CX at avenuecx.com. And actually, I will give you a pointer that on the avenuecx.com website, you can find some research that might be of interest to you if you're a technical communicator or information developer. We did a survey, myself, the Content Wrangler, and Avenue CX last year and early this year. And there's some data there about self-service experiences that might be interesting to you and your teams. So don't be shy. Check out avenuecx.com. And today you've been watching Effective Storytelling and Personalization with Alan J. Porter. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Alan, for being our guest.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you as always, Scott.
Excellent. And to the audience members, until next time, be safe, be well, keep doing great work. We'll see you on another episode of the Content Wrangler webinar series in the near future. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye.